The system can prey on egoic mindsets of people who want to earn love and achievement and acceptance through their startup, and myself included, and I still do all these things. So this is not a castigation of any particular entrepreneurs or younger entrepreneurs or anything. This is something we all do, that oftentimes our decisions are laden with desire to earn acceptance and love. I may raise money sooner than I should because that's going to look good to other people associated with the company.
Dave Hersh is a serial entrepreneur, founding CEO of NASDAQ-traded Jive Software, and author of the new book, Reignition. In this conversation, we discuss how inner transformation can change the trajectory of your career and company. Dave believes when we face the patterns from our past that no longer serve us, we create space to start to integrate new, powerful sources of intelligence.
If I could come in and just take away any insecurities whatsoever around this, such that you were solely a steward for the company. There was no identification with this company. There was no ego. There was no anything. You were literally just the stewards for the right outcome and the right trajectory of this business. What would be the right decision? And that's where people's intuition comes in. And if they can find themselves at a place where they can really be in touch with intuition, that the likelihood of them building out something successful goes way up.
Dave shares how intuition can lead us to our higher purpose and better outcomes in our business.
There's a reason we're on this planet. If our life were a movie, it's going to be about something really interesting if we can adhere to it. The problem is when our soul gets layered over with what the external world is telling us we are. And we have all these identities that get put on top of our essence. And that's what causes a lot of the suffering, because we don't know who we are anymore. And we're just a collection of external input.
To tap into our inner wisdom and find alignment, we need to have the courage to look inward and do the work.
Where do people go to get in touch with their intuition is doing the emotional work to reconcile with unhealthy patterns that are starting to affect their decision-making and their leadership and their ability to bring great people into the fold, to adhere to a larger purpose, to even execute against an operating plan. It is hard work, but it's really important work to go deeper than just try to read a book and try to be a better leader. It means reconciling with some of your demons, and by going deep into the emotional patterns that were developed in childhood that are starting to play out in your company and causing this lack of connection with intuition, and ultimately will cause your company to get stuck.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Dave, what's up, man?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to be having this conversation. And I always find it interesting to really get into the inflection points of someone's journey. I think those are really telling. And so at what point did you realize kind of what you were doing in the whole entrepreneurship, hard charging way of living just wasn't working?
Great question. I think there were a couple points. One was a crucible moment when my previous company was doing extremely well and the board was pushing really hard for us to go public. And at the time, my marriage broke down and I wasn't at home a lot, and I had to have one of those crucible moments of figuring out, am I a family guy or am I a work guy? Right. And
this is Jive Software, just so the listeners know.
This was Jive Software circa 2009, 2010. I was originally living in Portland. And then because of this shift, I moved the family down to California, and we were going to build up the headquarters down here because this is where all the people were, so we set up shop in Palo Alto. But it was one of those moments in life where the company was just on a tear and doing really well, and the board wanted to take it public, and it was very hard driving, probably toxic male board, that was pushing overly hard for growth and to take the company public. And I had to, I had a breakdown, and, just trying to reconcile with, am I this or am I that? And what do I stand for and what are my beliefs? And I think that was one of the first moments. And I actually ultimately decided not to be a public company CEO, moved into the chairman role and tried to stabilize the family. But that kicked off a period of like an odyssey of searching, which I think a lot of people have if they have some success in work and they have this period where, the success doesn't contribute to the happiness that was expected. Right. And so you have that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I got to reconcile with, everything I thought, this race I was running, that was supposed to be for me to earn love and happiness and respect and everything, suddenly isn't ending in the way that I thought it would. And I think maybe that was leading to the second moment, which you're talking about, which is all of these things that I've been trying, all these achievements that were meant to earn me that aren't turning into the outcomes that I expected. And it's even worse, because now I'm turning in on myself and pointing the finger at me for being broken in some way. So I think there was probably a second moment that happened maybe 5 years later, breaking down in that attempt to try to regain some sense of self, but using the old external tactics to do so.
So just to get the timeline, so you left Jive and you said, okay, this really isn't working, and kind of went on a search. But 5 years later, you found yourself trying to kind of apply the same strategy again.
Yeah, I think this happens a lot in entrepreneurship, startups, and especially the hard driving startup ecosystem out here in the Bay Area, that it's hard to escape the echo chamber infrastructure of startups, right? This is how you're known, right? So I built a company that was known. And so I tried incubating companies and sitting on boards and working as a VC, working in private equity, being a chairman of companies, all these things that were still trying to play the game within the same rules and ecosystem that I had grown up in. And even though it looked different, I wasn't a CEO necessarily anymore, that it was still trying to do the same thing. You're still trying to work within the same mechanical infrastructure to earn happiness, which is never going to work, but you have to experiment with it and try it in the hopes that maybe it would. So I think that second 5 year later moment was that recognition that I keep trying to find happiness within capitalism, in using the traditional means. And obviously that is a path towards, disappointment, because it's never going to happen.
And then what happened after that?
Then I think the first gateway of transformation that really made a difference was Hoffman. Hoffman Institute is a popular program for people who are in need of transformation and trying to find a different way. When all of the external mechanisms of trying to find happiness no longer seem to be working, you need to try something different and something more foundational. And it's a week-long intensive program that a lot of my friends have gone through as well, that it, has really good results. And it was the first time that I saw see firsthand how change really happens, which is at an emotional level, not an intellectual. And I think this is common for entrepreneurs who are used to solving problems with their mind and being seen as a smart person who can figure stuff out. But when it comes to your soul, when it comes to true joy and happiness and reconnecting with who you really are, not this identity of who you think you are, but who you really are, that can only happen at an emotional level. And that was the first time I really experienced that. So that would have been around 2016. And I think that kicked off a long, slow process towards, ultimate reconciliation and egoic dissolution, but took a long time to get there. So I credit Hoffman as that first moment of going, oh, source code is emotional and I have to change things at the source code level, right? I keep trying to rely on the mind is what's creating all this suffering, and I keep using the mind as the basis to try to solve the suffering. So it's, it's like one of those, the definition of insanity is, doing the same thing over and expecting different results. And it's like, there's another version of that, which is definition of insanity is your mind creating all of these painful suffering and repetitive patterns, and you rely on your mind to try to get you out of it. But the mind is more like a big room full of salespeople selling you on a bunch of ideas. And so I had to, strip it all down and get way down to the source code level. And that's the emotional level in order to rebuild all of these negative patterns from a better place.
That resonates deeply. And I think the source code, the root, that's a very powerful metaphor. As you were going through, this kind of fundamental shift, were you still like doing these activities in the external world and having these roles and wearing these hats, or were you just in pure kind of rebuild focus?
A little bit of both. I was definitely trying to rebuild the hats, but along the way, something interesting happened, which is when I was working in venture and seeing lots of different startups, I started to see patterns in that world that started to hit me at a deeper level. And one of those being that only 10% of startups are successful. And yet founders believe they have an 82% chance of success. And so it was a time when it struck a chord with me because I had been that person. I had been in that world and I was one of those founders. And there was a lot that I wish I had known as a young founder. And I started understanding how the system worked, which was a lot like Vegas, where you have these people pushing money into startups that really can't handle that much money, and in the form of placing bets. And the people placing the bets make money because the VCs make their money on 10% of the companies, and they do fine. But for the other 90% of the companies that get kind of chewed up and spit out by the system, that's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that don't amount to anything. So it was the first time it struck a chord. Like there was a waste problem, an injustice problem in there, and I started to see it differently. So I was still involved in the system, but I started buying some of these companies that had been pushed out by the system, that maybe had raised too much money and had gotten stuck, and started nursing them back to health. So taking these companies that tried to grow too fast, tried to be more than they were, tried to scale prematurely, and re-architect them around healthy, sustainable growth. And I think that touched a deeper nerve inside me, which made it start to get into some of that source material in terms of my motivations. So there was a shift that happened around that time where I was like, well, maybe there's something I can do here. And that ultimately was the thread that led to me writing the book that came out earlier this year.
And what is, having been one of those venture funded companies, not been quite the unicorn, been kind of the, I don't know, just like one of the less favored children is what it felt like. What is the kind of fundamentals and playbook that you think this kind of people that find themselves in that situation can at least contemplate that you propose in the book?
Yeah. And, I didn't mention it, but I've had 5 or 6 failures too, right? So it wasn't like I had one big win and I was like, I did it and it's all great. I had a lot of failures. So I got to see it from every angle possible. But in, being a bootstrapped founder for 5 years, a venture-backed founder, taking a company public, working at VC, working in private equity, being a failed founder, being a coach, being a chairman, being, an incubator of companies. I saw it from every angle and could see how the system worked. And part of what I wish I had known was how the system is not necessarily looking out for the best interests of the founders. So you have founders who have a really big idea they want to bring to the world. They want to take on risk. They want to do something interesting and create something. And they raise money to do that. And seed capital may be fine to get up and going. But what I see happen a lot of times is they try to raise more money too quickly. They try to raise money too quickly. They try to grow too quickly. and they try to launch product too quickly before the market's really ready. And ultimately, what you see happening pretty consistently is that they are pushing a product into a market that doesn't really want it, rather than waiting for the pull of the market. And that's a very different pattern. So I saw this happening pretty consistently. And it wasn't just the external, venture model. It was also the mindset of the founders, right? These two things play off of each other, right? The system can prey on egoic mindsets of people who want to earn love and achievement and acceptance through their startup. And so founders tend to, and myself included, and I still do all these things. So this is not a castigation of any particular entrepreneurs or younger entrepreneurs or anything. This is something we all do, that oftentimes our decisions are laden with that desire to earn acceptance and love. So in other words, I may raise money sooner than I should because that's going to look good to other people associated with the company, right? And it's going to look good to our employees, and it's going to feel really good to have money in the bank. And that's going to be a form of success that contributes to my inner state. And so that you see people making moves like that, making decisions which are subconsciously burdened with this desire to be perceived in a certain way in the world. And so it was important to me not just to shine a light on the system behind entrepreneurs that is leading to companies getting stuck, but also our inner state, our mindset, our blind spots that cause us to make those decisions in the first place. And those two things working in harmony with each other, if you understand how it works, it offers up a lot of powerful insights into how you should really grow your company. And so that's the beginning of the book, is just saying, here's how the external world is, getting in your way of building out your dreams. And here's how your inner world is getting in the way of you building out your dreams. And if you can reconcile with those and not only come to terms, but change how you think about it from a values perspective and growth perspective, you're going to build something. You have a much higher likelihood of building something that is what you want to do in the world.
It's such a good insight about how, just how the ego gets involved in this equation. Like I think about just these kind of like artificial milestones of raising money, and how it's like, oh yeah, how much did you raise? How much should I raise? And how that feels really good. And it feels like you've accomplished something, and then you're way ahead of your skis in terms of how much revenue you're actually making and what the market can support and all of these things. And just having the awareness of like, what is the real reason that you want that money?
Yeah.
Is it because you actually need it, or is it because you can't wait to share on Twitter and LinkedIn that your company just raised 20 million from Andreessen or whoever?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And if I could come in and just take away any insecurities whatsoever around this, such that you were solely a steward for the company, there was no identification with this company, there was no ego, there was no anything. You were literally just the stewards for the right outcome and the right trajectory of this business. What would be the right decision? And that's where people's intuition comes in. And if they can find themselves at a place where they can really be in touch with intuition, that the likelihood of them building out something successful goes way up. And this is really important to me, so that I don't come across as, as some of my friends will say, that I'm just spewing woo, right? Because I've done so much work. It's not. This is like hardened, inner work that creates outer results, right? So if you can be in a more intuitive place as a leader and really see decisions for what they are and how they contribute to the best interest of the company over the long run, it changes the trajectory in a meaningful way. And that's what I try to do to help a lot of the founders and CEOs that I work with.
I love that. I love the kind of steward shepherd analogy. I don't know if this resonates with you, but one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of creation is kind of taking a step back and thinking, instead of like, what do I want, this thing that I'm working on to become, almost being more like, what does this want to become? what are the natural forces of the book or the company or the community or whatever it is? What are those kind of emerging signals and signs that I'm getting, and how do I just be the one that's kind of just gently massaging its natural flow?
It's a really good way to think about it. Yeah, the Greeks had the idea of the daemon, which was akin to a guardian angel, right? We each have our own daemon, and that daemon guides our activities and our energy in the most enlightened way. And it's a beautiful metaphor because what it does is separate you from the product. You can be engaged in the energy flow, to put the woo terms on it, right? You can be engaged in this work, but not be so identified with it that it holds you back from creating something really beautiful and great. And I think what you're saying is very true. Yeah, if you can stop seeing this business as an extension of you or some egoic need for acceptance. And it comes to, again, I do this stuff all the time. So there's no, I'm not pointing a light at particular types of entrepreneurs or saying it's bad to have an ego. We all have it. And in some cases, it's beautiful, right? And in my case, it was a hero, right? I was trying to rescue the company and save the day, and but that's obviously part of the drama triangle of victim, bully, savior, and so and that hero energy would mean that I would, maybe save workers sometimes by taking the work away from them and doing it myself, right? Which clearly is not giving them agency. It's not helping them by doing it. Or it may mean in some cases that I was even keeping the company going for longer than it should have gone. There's times when it's not meant to be, and you need to call it that. But I would be like, no, we can rescue this company. We can do it again. So that ego may come from a beautiful place in some level, but unless we can see it for what it is and the patterns that it's giving rise to, we're never really going to transform our companies in the way that we hoped. And it's going to hold our companies back in pretty powerful ways that we may not see.
How do you, people that are probably leaders of companies, organizations that are on the inner work path, I think there's some level of acknowledgement of this connection. How does someone get someone to open to this idea if they're not already doing the inner work? Like I can just see so many founders I know that like, yeah, I guess like, figuring out my ego patterns, that sounds interesting, but like I have a board meeting next week.
Yeah, totally.
There's always the thing that's more important. That's like some execution oriented action than the inner work.
Yeah. I think sometimes the operating plan can be the shared vernacular for, is the company on track? But the difference would be if I have a board that I go to and I can tell them, I know where this company is, I know what it needs, and we need to be on a longer trajectory of learning, not of launching product in the next year, and here's why. Because I can see it. And I'm going to build an operating plan that falls in line with that thinking, which means that I agree as CEO, I'm going to go leaner, longer, because I know what this company needs. And I'm going to hold off on certain new expenses or hires because we need to go through a learning process for longer than would be ideal, but that's what we need. And so the interactions with the board would be something like that, of saying, I'm going to push back on you, board, who's saying we want ARR growth, or we want, better CAC to LTV, or whatever it is they're pushing on. An enlightened leader would say, well, that's not what the business needs. And my agreement is that I'm going to adhere to this operating plan that we agreed to in terms of how I spend this money over a certain period of time. But the way we do that is going to be in line with what I believe is right for the company. And so there's a healthy back and forth that happens when you have an intuitive leader who is not falling prey to, well, I'm just going to do what the board asks me, or I'm going to do what, the lemming like, VC model. I'm going to, raise money every 18 months. I'm going to try to triple, double. Like there's a thing that happens where ultimately the leader is being weaker because they are trying to adhere to a set of playbooks and patterns that are not really theirs. Versus if they're working from intuition and they really have a deep sense of what the company needs, Then the work with the board is to establish the right operating model and budget to support that intuitive understanding of where the company needs to go. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. How do you think someone gets in touch with their intuition as a leader?
Yeah, this is where the inner work comes in. And I think when you can, this is emotional work, right? This is the hardest part about it. Having been a leader, I wish I had had access to the work that I have done now, because I would have been a much better leader. I tell the story of Jive, the company we talked about before, got started at the same time as Atlassian, right? They were two guys, we were three guys, we were all friends. And, we went on a certain path. And leading Jive, my insecurity got the best of me. And I started just saying, well, these people, these fancy people, we need to raise money from them and they understand this. And let's just go to the playbook that they're recommending and let's go up to the enterprise. And I stopped being in connection with my intuition about the right thing to do. And I started doing what the world was telling me I was supposed to do. And what it meant was the company went a direction which was very playbook oriented and ultimately brought playbook people into the fold and, ultimately led to its demise. Versus Atlassian kind of stuck to their guns and kept doing the thing that was serving them well. And it worked really well. And they became a 40 billion plus company, right? So what I'm talking about is not just ideas about, being deeper in the inner work. It actually has very meaningful impact on how these companies play out. And so all that to say, where do people go to get in touch with their intuition is doing the emotional work to reconcile with unhealthy patterns that are starting to affect their decision making and their leadership and their ability to bring great people into the fold, to adhere to a larger purpose, to even execute against an operating plan. So it is hard work, but it's really important work to go deeper than just try to read a book and try to be a better leader. It means reconciling with some of your demons, and by going deep into the emotional patterns that were developed in childhood that are starting to play out in your company and causing this lack of connection with intuition, and ultimately will cause your company to get stuck.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I think a lot of people think trusting that is really risky. They think trusting their intuition is really risky. And the funny thing is that most people I ask, like, have you ever regretted trusting your intuition? Is there a major time that you did that and it went really bad, or you really regret doing it? Nobody usually has an answer.
Yeah, it's very true. I was at a conference recently, actually, and there was a UGC on data versus intuition and decisions. And it was a room full of people. It was UGC, user generated content. So it was being led by one of the participants. And one of the thought questions was, when was a time when you should have used the other, when it should have been data or it should have been intuition. And all the stories were, I used data when I should have used intuition. Not to say there aren't decisions that can be data driven, but we tend to over rely on data in this era. There's just so much of it. And we feel like that's going to be a better justification for our decision. We're going to be able to, cover our ass in a way with data in a way that we wouldn't if it was an intuitive decision. And I see the desire for people to do that. But if you can really develop that connection to your gut in a powerful way, it is one of the most amazing things I have ever witnessed as a leader, because decisions stop being decisions. You can literally see through all of it and see the right path. But getting there, the process to get to that place can be challenging, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in doing it.
Definitely. And the other thing I would comment on this is that, think about the amount of energy spent in deliberating things. Like, I just remember with my last company, and this was really before I had spent a lot of time honing my intuition, like I would just go back and forth, second guess, call people, ask for advice, like do all of these things when there was a way to just kind of discern what was the decision that was for the best and highest inside myself the whole time. And man, I wish I would have had access to that in so many instances. Just so much more efficiency and so much more energy for creativity.
Yeah, there really is. And I know you had Joe Hudson on the podcast recently, and I've done a lot of work with Joe, and it's been exceedingly transformative for me. But he's got a course, with his group, Art of Accomplishment, which is called the Great Decisions Course. And that's about understanding, the art of decision making, both having principles that can help you guide the decisions you make, but also being able to do the emotional inquiry to understand what's really going on inside me that may be holding me back from seeing this decision in the way that's going to offer the most clarity.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. One of the things that I want to ask you is, I've heard you talk about the fact that, you had this notion of the system is broken and a bunch of insights about kind of a new way of doing things and decided to write this book. And I heard you talk about how you're kind of in this space where you don't know where this is going to go, but you do know you enjoy doing it. And I think that's probably scary as shit to some people. And so I want to hear a little bit more about kind of like how you got there and what that experience has been like.
Great question. I read a book 15 years ago called Transitions, and it was actually written in the 70s by a guy named William Bridges. And it was a beautiful treatise on the idea of these liminal spaces in between phases of our life. So when you go through a change like death of a family member or divorce or changing job, that there is a process by which you have to really grieve the old and let it go, and then be in this liminal period, this limbo space. And then, only then can you kind of start to be reborn into the next version of yourself. And that embracing of the liminal phase is something that I never really knew how to do before. And it took me a long time to learn. But the idea is that you're really a ghost between worlds. There's an old you that needs to die, and there's a new you that can be reborn. But in between, you have to, as I say, have the antennae up, not the blinders on. Meaning you need to be open to lots of ideas and lots of different conversations and different ways of being in the world, and run a bunch of little experiments similar to a startup, right? And like in an early stage of a startup, you just want to go test a bunch of things and see where the pull comes from. And that's really important for a startup, is when you find the pull, it means you've tapped into that product market need in a profound way. And people are saying, we really like what you're doing, do more of this. Well, the same is true of our lives, where, I was a young CEO and I did my company. And at first, instead of trying to open myself up to new ways of being in the world, I kept trying to be a CEO, right? It's like I was going into the wilderness, right? And getting scared and like, I want to go back. And because that was the identity I had before that served me. So how do I go back to that CEO self? Because that's what I know. And I think our culture doesn't have a lot of rituals for deep transformation. And so we see that a lot, right? Whether it's somebody going back and getting plastic surgery to try to look 27 forever, or, getting the band back together at, in their 50s or whatever it is, right? We don't have models for true transformation. But if you can really embrace that liminal, if you can really not have to have the answer to the questions, not be at a cocktail party and say, what, I don't know, I'm doing a lot of things right now. And it may go a lot of different directions. If you can truly love that space of unknown, amazing things happen. And I'm in it right now. Getting the book out there was in a way a coming out party for my second mountain, my second half of life. And instead of saying, I'm going to go, be a thought leader, I'm going to be a speaker, and put a bunch of structure around it, I was like, I don't know where it goes. And then I get to be in conversations like this with wonderful people like you, and all these rooms where people are having these great conversations about, how inner work creates outer results. And those are my favorite people. And it's awesome. And I get to do all these things. And I don't really know where it goes, but I trust that it's going to congeal in the right way. And you can do this in a way where you can still make enough money coming in to support the lifestyle that you want. But I think in our culture, we want to have all the answers, right? We want to have a brand. We want to have positioning. We want to have, and we're taught to do that. We want to have the elevator pitch. We want to have everything structured in a way where everybody understands it at a moment's notice, because there's so much competition for attention. And if we can just say, screw it, let go of it, I don't know. And I am seeking happiness and, joy and desire in what I do in the world. And I'm going to connect with meaning at a much deeper level. Things will start to happen. And I see this happen quite a bit. And it can happen even if you remain being a CEO. The new CEO that you become as opposed to the old one can be a very different version of it.
I think a lot of people listen to this and like, it sounds nice, but like, how the hell do I do that? And so do you have any to me, like the thing that's really the linchpin is just having trust, having a set, like continued trust that it will all work out and that you're going to be okay. And I just wonder how you've been able to kind of cultivate that so that foundation so that you can, be at ease within the liminal state.
Yeah. Well, what I do for companies is very similar to what we do as people, where what I see happen with companies and why they go astray is they have something that they're really good at, something that they're what I call their core. That is what gets them off the ground and gets things up and running, right? They are the best in the world at one thing. Where it goes astray is when they start layering a bunch of other stuff on top of that core too quickly. While we serve financial services clients, but we're going to get out of there. We're going to go into automotive and we're going to get into insurance. We're going to go all do these other verticals, right? That's where it starts to go astray. And the same is true of us as people, right? We have one thing. We have a soul that is beautiful. There's a reason we're on this planet. If our life were a movie, it's going to be about something really interesting if we can adhere to it. The problem is when our soul gets layered over with what the external world is telling us we are. And we have all these identities that get, put on top of our essence. And that's what causes a lot of the suffering because we don't know who we are anymore. And we're just a collection of external input. So I think in companies, if we are speaking to someone who is actively in a company right now, yeah, I get it. I mean, that's a hard place to be. There's only so much, deep transformation work you can do if you are in a startup and you are under the gun all the time. What I'm saying is that startup's likelihood of success is going to be 5 to 10 times higher if you are connected at a deeper level to an intuitive sense of how to guide that business in the right way. Versus if you are hamstrung or burdened with egoic needs that generate bad decision making or that negatively impact the decisions you're going to make, your likelihood of going astray is much higher. And so I look at hundreds of companies that are on the we got stuck end. So this is what I'm bringing to it is I'm trying to meet entrepreneurs where they are and say, I'm going to make you more successful. And just know that it may come with work that's not going to be as comfortable at first, but man, is it valuable. And your likelihood of creating something lasting, meaningful, sustainable, and creates joy for you over the long run is much higher if you can take on this work.
It's beautiful. It's classic. Sell them what they want, give them what they need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, we talked about Joe, his thing is art of accomplishment, right? And that's meeting people where they are. It's saying, These are
That's
people
right.
who want to achieve something in the world, and you got to meet people where they are. And I get that. And we all want to do that, and that's okay. But if we can do it from a deeper, more inexhaustible fuel source of something that has meaning and is, deeply connected to us, it's a more beautiful thing. It makes us happier. It's more successful, and, has a longer future. If it's coming from an insecure place of, I'm going to try to prove myself to this company, I'm going to identify with this company, it's me, I'm going to earn love and respect and raise a bunch of rounds and try to make this thing really big and fancy. And, it often goes sideways.
Yeah. And the really interesting thing that I've noticed, and this kind of gets into like what is reality, is that when I do go astray, when I'm not aligned with my soul's, deeper purpose of whatever I came to do here, I just encounter obstacle after obstacle. It's like things are just difficult, and it's almost like arbitrary blockades have been put up in me doing whatever it is I'm trying to do. And so, in many ways, like when I start to see that, it's like life is really just trying to direct me. It's trying to get me back on course with that thing. And, I don't, who really knows, right? But I do find that looking at reality that way is a hell of a lot more fun.
Yeah, it is harder, but it is a lot more fun. And there is a freedom that comes in seeing, if you have a company that you are doing right now and you see it less as a bunch of shoulds. I should do this. I'm supposed to do this. I have to do that. It just feels like a burden to, this is a sandbox. I get to be me in the sandbox. I get to kind of create something and use this as the basis to do the thing I love in the world. In chapter 2 of the book, I tell a story about a guy named Jesse Pujji, who, hard driving father who was an entrepreneur and pushed him really hard, didn't offer a lot of positive feedback, and just kind of thrust him into the world. And he did Wharton undergrad and Goldman and McKinsey and was just always that guy, and built a company with that spirit, and eventually, got the company off the ground, but the culture was a disaster. And he was so hard driving and pushing so hard that energy burned out, and he just wanted to leave, and he couldn't do it. But he ended up, instead of selling the company, getting some investment and a board that was supportive of him getting coaching. And he transformed himself in a really powerful way to stop being a martyr, stop being, burdened by all the shoulds of what he's supposed to do and trying to earn his love and acceptance through the company, into, oh no, I get to do what I want with this company. And what I really care about is growing people. And so his whole context shifted, and it became his company again. And he turned his attention to building out, a system of human growth within his company, and everything changed, and the company took off, and the retention went up, and the Glassdoor reviews went up, and, and then the company did what it was supposed to do. It got on a much better trajectory, and to the point where he was like, I'm probably no longer the right person to be CEO, and stepped down and, went that direction. But it is a very, very powerful thing when we have a shift of seeing this company as a burden, and we're just trying to live up to expectations, versus this company is a sandbox for me to do what I love doing in the world.
That's a very powerful frame.
It is. And I've seen a lot of people shift in that frame, and thankfully I almost didn't write chapter 2. Chapter 2 was the one that was the, most deeply felt vulnerable. And this is all about your mindset and the psychological blind spots that we have. And it was very important to me, but I almost didn't write it because I was like, is it going to be too woo for people? And the beautiful thing that happened is I did write it and wrote it in a vulnerable way. And now it's the thing that everybody wants to talk about, right?
I was going to say, I bet you that's everyone's favorite chapter.
Yeah, very much so. And it's been amazing for that to be the case. I remember working with a startup one time where, they had built this big application for sales teams, and it was just, it does this and this, and you can have all these things. And they were like, yeah, we just like this one feature though. Like, it's great, it does all these things, but we really like this one feature. Can you do more of this feature? And so it was like they pulled out that feature of the product, and it kind of grew into its own product in a beautiful way, because that was what people needed. And that is that liminal space thing we're talking about. For me, writing this book, it was a very practical guide for startups, but I put in this chapter that was very deeply felt for me. And that's the thing that people want to talk about. And it becomes the seed that grows into this next phase of my career and all these conversations and all these wonderful things. So I think it's a metaphor for how I think startups can change if they can kind of reorient around what they most deeply feel.
I love that. I know you talked about, in Jesse's example, the notion of kind of growing people and building a human growth engine. I know something that you've thought a lot about is we're entering a pretty revolutionary time in how work gets done with the onset of AI and its prevalence and just various functions. How do you think, what does the future look like for where there's more AI and we're integrated with it in the way that we work and how we can succeed? Where does this inner work really come into that?
Yeah, I'm of the camp, and this is actually the content of my next book that I'm working on now, that it is going to promote a deep need for the things that make us uniquely human. In other words, as AI takes over the part of the stack that we have been doing, the knowledge work part, creating documents, sending emails, moving data around, sharing presentations with people, that we have to now focus on the things that humans are best at doing. So it's almost like historically in the last 50 years, we've become the parts of the computer. We've been processors. We've just been moving data around because the systems weren't as intelligent to be able to do it themselves. Now, the systems can not only intelligently move the data around, but contextualize it in a beautiful way that almost seems human. And so where does that leave the people? I believe that it's going to be very hard to build competitive advantage in companies through traditional means like technology and IP and network effects, because the systems can create that in minutes. So the elements that are going to drive lasting competitive advantage are going to be the things that are harder to create and more meaningful over the long run. And those tend to skew human in my perspective. And the stories that I'm collecting right now are those, how are people doing really innovative things to reimagine companies as systems of human growth? So we can better attract the best and brightest people. We can foster a sense of deep connection and curiosity and creativity and humor and love and connection, and these things that only humans can do, that can serve as the basis for a sustainable organization in the future. So in a way, I like to imagine that we're going to be forced to be better humans because that's where the jobs are going to be, right? And I think companies that embrace some of these ideas and embrace humanity in a world where everybody's craving it are going to do really well. You know, for example, I coach companies right now on, we've been trained to look at market openings and to analyze markets and analyze them, you know, so that we can see where's the white space and where do we fit in, where are we going to find product market fit, to overlay emotional openings in the market. So we stop just looking at, you know, where are there less competitors and what is the emotional landscape of the buyers and where are they and what do they most want? What do they most desire? Where are they most frustrated? You know, what's going to really touch the hearts and minds of your buyers? And I don't care if it's procurement software, right? There are ways to understand the emotional landscape that can drive smarter decisions and faster growth in companies than what we do today. So for me, I care deeply about this concept and that we're going to have to find ways to retrain people to think about competitive advantage and reimagine the idea of a company less as a, you know, profit engine and more as these systems of human growth, because people can go anywhere and the technology can be created in minutes. The products can be created anywhere, right? We've atomized capitalism in such a way that the idea of a company is going to have to switch. And unless you have something with longevity to hold on to, it's going to be very hard to sustain a company over the long run and grow it in the same way.
I'm thinking of this advice that Ram Dass gave in one of his books or lectures. Somebody asked, where should I go? Where should I work? And I think he said, I don't know, but you should probably go work wherever the most enlightened people are.
I love that.
Yeah. Have you found any examples of this that you find compelling?
I write about a lot of these in my newsletter on my site. It's called 1 in 10,000. And I try to find stories of people who are implementing some of these ideas. But because I just birthed the first book, I'm a little new into the process of collecting stories. I'm in that process now, trying to collect stories for the second book. But I'm finding a lot of stories of people who are connecting with that deeper source and figuring out their career and in building their companies. And it's very exciting to me how quickly you're seeing people start to become more enlightened and adopt some of these ideas. And, it's not just hey, I'm going through middle age and therefore I'm starting to seek meaning. I think we tell that story, but I'm seeing a lot of, 30-year-old founders who, it's maybe not the same because they're not middle age, but they are doing really meaningful things and adhering to very beautiful connections to meaning, to who they really are, to trying to create change in the world. And so I see a generational shift happening too, where more people are open to it. So I guess all that to say, I'm in the process of collecting stories, starting to tell some of them on a smaller scale, but it is definitely the seeds of change are, being sown. And we're starting to see a very different approach to company building across generations. And I'm very heartened by that.
One idea that I love that's related to this, and maybe I can give you one of your first stories, is that the products you build are essentially just a representation of the consciousness of the company. And, I think I actually technically, like our company technically sold to Slack within Salesforce. And so I've gotten to know Slack really well. And one of Slack's product principles has always been to make something delightful. And the big competitor that with Slack has always been these other chat systems, Microsoft Teams or HipChat or whatever it is. And everybody loves Slack because they really spend a lot of time and a lot of extra emphasis on just bringing joy and fun into the product with like emojis and the characters and like all of these little things. I mean, it's not anything super new that they've built, but they've built it in such a way that makes these human elements really come out and shine and be easy. And, that was because from day one, that was important to them.
Yeah, I like that. I wish more people would adopt belief systems from companies that have been successful and approaches to creating principles rather than try to replicate what they actually did. I see a lot of startups that are like, we're trying to build Slack for this or the next Slack, or we're trying to, do another collaboration system for this kind of work. And they're usually trying to copy too closely, what's already out there, or don't really understand how hard it is, to create these systems. But I do think if you had started from those foundational beliefs and those core principles, you might end up with something that has a much higher likelihood of finding, real traction in the world.
It's a good distinction. And I think not even just having those principles, but also sticking to them, because what I see is a lot of companies will say something like, yeah, we want to have really emphasize surprise and delight in our products. But then it's like, it's always weighed against some practical, I need to have the next feature, or need to have the next user management, GUI or whatever. And so they don't ever actually truly put their money where their mouth is with these kind of more lofty, touchy-feely principles.
Yeah. So Slack was a gaming company, right? I mean, people forget that.
Totally.
Right. that Slack was a gaming company that just developed this system on their own, just for their own internal communication. And like we talked about before, that thing became their beauty in the world. That became their essence, but it was accidental. And that's that liminal space we were talking about. So sorry to interrupt, but I just, I think that's a really powerful thing, is these companies trying to, too closely copy the ideas as opposed to going deeper and copying the foundational beliefs that give rise to serendipity and, beauty that can be, find purchase in the world.
Yeah, they're a great example of someone who went where the pull was, with that pivot. One question I have for you that I found myself thinking about earlier that I didn't get a chance to ask is, so this VC system and kind of raising too much money, the whole thing that kind of perpetuates itself, like, how do you think this plays out? Like, how does this thing change?
I'm not anti-VC, and the book's not anti-VC, and I'm very clear about that. I am anti too much VC and anti too early VC. And what I see as the guy who is the, help get companies unstuck guy, is that over-reliance on funding as the means to growth, as opposed to market pull that we've talked about as the means to grow, right? I want companies to raise when it's irresponsible not to. And so I don't know how to change the system with with advice or very specific, ideas. I think the system changes when the successful companies do things that are different. And so my whole raison d'etre in the world is to align the aspirational goals of people with better ways of doing it that are more enlightened. And by being more enlightened, creating better outcomes for everybody. So as you said before, I don't know, I can remember how you phrased it, but, be more successful by doing the right things, or whatever it was. So I think the system changes when you see more companies, and you have more examples of companies doing it the right way that are successful. And my hope is that during this next era, over the next 10, 20 years, as computers take over the means of production work, and, it's going to drive a lot of difficult decisions, like, do we have universal basic income? And, we just don't need as many jobs anymore. And what is the idea of a company? And, and is it okay to have a company of 5 people that's very profitable for a long time, as opposed to try to grow things in a traditional way? So I think the zeitgeist will change, hopefully, and that's what will drive different approaches to building companies. In the meantime, I'm just doing my damnedest to, try to shine a light on how the system works, and help them see that this is a better way, and it is going to build more successful companies, and you're going to transform yourself in the process. And that's the beautiful part about it.
Well, I think it's a beautiful message, and I'm happy that you're out there, sharing this information. For people that want to learn more about the book and your newsletter and all the things that you're kind of the upcoming book that you're doing, what's the best place for them to do that?
My website is davehersh.com, HERSH.com. And I have a newsletter they can sign up for, where you get all kinds of good ideas for how to build really sustainable companies and successful companies in the right way. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. I put a lot of content out on LinkedIn. Just search for Dave Hersh and you should find it. And yeah, the book's for sale anywhere. Reignition, and which often I've learned too late that I get turned into resignation by spell check. Sometimes autocorrect will turn into resignation, which I find kind of funny. But books Reignition on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the other normal places. And or just ping me. I'm Dave@davehersh.com.
Love it, man. Love it. I think Reignition is a great title, especially for that, get that unstuck part, because I just know so many people, including myself at various times, that have been there, and it's like, you just want that charge up, and I think what you're saying is that charge up might look and feel a little bit different than you thought it did, but it works.
Yeah. And it's beautiful when it happens.
I love it, man. All right, Dave. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Thank you for everybody listening. We're super grateful for you sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.